think our top priority has to be coming to terms with the effects of energy development across the country, which also ties to climate change. The water impacts, the habitat impacts associated with energy development have a profound effect on fisheries. And to the extent that we're better able to organize our chapters and other sportsmen and women organizations to talk to decision makers to make sure that we're developing our national energy supplies, but doing so in a responsible way, is imperative. Also, it's important that we begin to develop renewable resources across public and private lands. And TU stands very ready and willing to help with that endeavor. We just want to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes of the past in terms of oil and gas development out west, for example, in developing these new technologies. So we want to make sure we have a minimal impact on fish and wildlife habitat. Right now, TU has about 140,000 members. We estimate that about 10% of those members are actively involved in our work on a day-to-day or weekly basis. And it's an extraordinarily dedicated cadre of volunteers who do everything from teach kids to fly fish to testifying before members of Congress. It's an extremely powerful group of people. I think to help TU reach its potential, we need to both increase the percentage of members who are actively engaged, but maybe even more importantly, if there's about 6.9 million people who fish for trout in this country, per a report that I just saw today from the Fish and Wildlife Service, we have only 140,000 members. Contrast that with an organization like Ducks Unlimited, where they have about 680,000 members out of a universe of 1.2 million duck hunters. And something's not right there. We have to find a way to increase the value proposition of what it means to be a TU member so that anyone who fishes for trout and salmon almost feels a personal responsibility to become a member or at least a supporter of Trout Unlimited. As someone who was brought up Irish Catholic, I appreciate more than most the value of guilt as a motivating factor. And somehow we have to, maybe guilt's not the best way to do it, but somehow we have to convince sportsmen, people who fly fish or just fish for trout and salmon or who care about trout and salmon, that they need to become members of TU. I don't think so. I mean, the day after, or the night that the board named me president and CEO, I was sitting at the dinner table with Betsy, my wife, who should be forgiven, given that she was 9 months pregnant and delivered a child 2 days later. Mm-hmm. But what she said to me was, all you can do from here, Chris, is screw this up. And I think what she was saying was a testament to Charles's leadership and his stewardship of the organization. When Charles took over TU, we were an organization of about 40,000 members. We had 1 conservation staff and an organizational budget of about $2 million. Charles took that to where we are today, where we now have about 150, 160 conservation folks working in the field, an organizational budget of about $25 million, and 140,000 members. So I think TU is a remarkably healthy organization. I don't intend to heed Betsy's admonition and screw this thing up. But I do think that if there's a difference between Charles and I, it's that I came to Trout Unlimited and am most motivated by its grassroots membership. When I worked at the Forest Service, one of my jobs was to take meetings for all the people that the chief of the Forest Service didn't want to meet with. So I had dozens of meetings with environmental groups. I had dozens of meetings with commodity interests and the regulated community. The one constituency that I never had a meeting request from was sportsmen and women organizations. Hunters and anglers never made their voice heard over in our office. And we were in the middle of promulgating what perhaps one of the most impactful regulations affecting fish habitat, certainly in the country, the Roadless Area Conservation Rule, which protected 58 million acres of some of the finest fish habitat in North America. Anyway, I decided that I wanted to help to try to change that dynamic, and there was only one organization that I wanted to work for to do that, and that was Trout Unlimited. And that's because not just of the extraordinary policy experience and skill and legal skill that the organization had through staff people like Steve Moyer, but because it had a grassroots network that could be leveraged to testify before Congress, to talk to decision makers, and you know, I wanted to be a part of an organization that had that kind of grassroots presence. So, you know, I don't intend to do anything substantively different than we've been doing, other than to really try to emphasize the importance and the role of the grassroots in the organization. What distinguishes TU among the dozens of conservation groups out there is that there's a ton of groups that do advocacy, the Sierra Club, the Wilderness Society, NRDC, and there's lots of groups, single species groups that do habitat restoration, Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and so on. But there are really very few groups, maybe no groups, other than TU that does both advocacy and on-the-ground restoration. And I think that's a distinguishing feature of our organization, and it's one we ought to celebrate and be proud of. We're able to bring back to DC and to state legislatures, people who vote, and they're able to convince members of Congress or state legislators that they need to listen to our habitat concerns. In the strategic plan of the organization, and I know that strategic plans are like watching paint dry. They're not known to be very exciting, but I think ours is somewhat exciting because we have this concept that we call one TU, and the concept behind that is that there ought to be no distinction between the goals of the national organization from the goals of the state councils, from the goals of the chapters. And that vision is best typified by our whole approach to conservation, which we describe as protect, reconnect, restore, and sustain. And what I mean by that is the biological imperative of the organization, if you look at my arm as a river system, is to protect the higher quality waters which are found in the headwaters. These are your roadless areas, your wilderness areas that are so important to protect. But because we can't manage those in isolation, we have to allow those to be reconnected down to lower elevation areas through removing obsolete dams, fixing perched culverts, making sure western rivers have water in them. And then because historically the most biologically productive portions of the landscape were in the lower elevation areas, we have to restore those. So this notion of protecting, reconnecting, and restoring integrated river systems defines our biological agenda. But the social imperative is just as important, and that is, namely, how do we sustain all of that good conservation work over time? And that's where the grassroots come in. Building that next generation of conservation leadership is absolutely vital, and we count on them to help execute that. It's basically a very simple equation. It's because we have passionate, knowledgeable, and dedicated volunteers in combination with some of the most skilled and effective advocates on staff in the country. And together, those two elements represent an almost unstoppable force. My most memorable fishing experience is the last time I went fishing with my kids.
Where was that?
This past weekend, it was actually a fishless day on Rock Creek. But I'll tell you a good fishing story, which is memorable. But I mean what I say about my kids, though. It's really, there's nothing like having a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old out on the water. But my most memorable experience had nothing to do with the fly rod. It was in Cape Cod, and I was spin fishing for blues with my friend John Soderberg, and was picking up the wire leader. I was leaning over the boat to retrieve the fish, and I grabbed the wire leader, and I heard my friend let out a sharp, excited, maybe scared cry, and I turned to look back at him, and as I was looking at him, yelling my name, I caught out of the corner of my eye a big brown shape move up through the water and take the bluefish from my hand. It was a shark. It was about 8 inches from my hand, and I fell back and dropped the rod, and he ended up taking a big chunk of the bluefish, but I saved the rod and saved my hand, and everything, all was well that ended well.